Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Noble's Reimagining Policing in the 21st Century. I am Christopher Scott, Senior Policy Advisor for Open Society Policy Center, Open Society Foundations, where I focus on policing reform, criminal justice, education, and youth justice. Thank you for joining us. We're going to have a great panel discussion today about reimagining policing in the 21st century. First, I'd like to welcome our sponsors, Brian Streminsky from Verizon Wireless, Managing Partner of Verizon, to offer a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Chris, and thank everyone for attending this session. I wish we could be in person with Noble. This is I was actually counting right before this call. This is my 12th time participating in a different Noble event. I look forward to this event every year. I apologize that we can't be in person, but as we all know, as we battle this horrific pandemic and the COVID, and as my wife, who's a nurse at Johns Hopkins, reminds me, be safe rather than be sorry. So as we go to this panel here, and as we come to this live broadcast, which we're very excited, I think emerging technologies and how we address policing in the 21st century is more relevant than ever. As I'm sitting at my home office here, and this is what I do, 10 to 12 hours a day. And today I'm coming to you live from just north of Baltimore, Maryland. Cannot be happier to sponsor this event and more importantly, this panel here. So I look forward to a very spirited dialogue, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chris, to take us from here.
Thank you, Brian. I also want to welcome Truist Financial Corporation and welcome Wendy McSweeney to offer some opening remarks as Senior VP Chief Inclusion Officer for Truist.
Hello, everyone, my Noble family. I bring you greetings this afternoon from rainy and stormy Atlanta, Georgia, and must admit that not having the ability to be with everyone in person for our annual reunion has been one of the biggest disappointments of this quarantine. I truly hope each of you and your families are safe, healthy, and well. For the past 5 years, SunTrust, now Truist, has partnered with Noble to be a part of the solution. At Truist, our mission is to inspire and build better lives and communities, which directly aligns with Noble's mission of ensuring equity in the administration of justice and serving as the conscience of law enforcement. In essence, Noble seeks to build better lives and communities as well. Through our partnership, we will continue to educate the youth, support open and candid dialogue on the issues, and serve as a trusted advisor in building solutions, providing hope and inspiration for tomorrow. It's truly an honor to represent Truist and sponsor this session on reimagining policing in the 21st century. We look forward to an engaging and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Now I'd like to open it up and bring our panelists on. I will introduce them one by one, and we will hopefully get a chance to hear from them and have them give some remarks and also tell us why they are engaged in this conversation today. So first up, William Gross, Police Commissioner, Boston Police Department. We also have joining Commissioner Gross, Renee Hall, Chief of Police for the Dallas Police Department. Also joining us is Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And finally, Benjamin Crump, Civil Rights Attorney. And as we get started today, I would be remiss if I didn't say that, this conversation is one that is of really important, given the moment in time that we're currently in. Given all the things that we see happening today, this conversation is timely and very important. As we know, there are over 600,000 sworn officers in the United States. Every year, those officers have over 50 million successful engagements with citizens. Yet, we must recognize the increasing number of high-profile police-involved fatalities, violence at the hands of police, and unprecedented number of wrongfully accused and issues of disparate convictions and sentencing. The world screams for criminal justice reform to address all of these issues. When it comes to reimagining policing, we've been down this road many times. The 1967 Kerner Commission, the 2014 Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, and now a new commission on law enforcement and administration of justice established this year. How do we respond to the calls for defunding, abolishing, and reestablishing police departments? This panel of leaders in law enforcement and lifelong advocates for equal justice will explore what a fair and just culture in policing looks like for officers and the communities they serve. I hope that we can be as candid and as open as possible when discussing these conversations. And I hope that you all can please, introduce yourselves as I go around the table and talk about what brings you to this work, and why you're engaged in this work and what you'd like to see out of this panel. So we'll start with Commissioner Gross.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I've been a proud member of Noble for 13 years, and for the panelists. Wow, it's an honor to be here among you all today. I'm looking forward to hearing from each and every one of you in this very important panel discussion. What brings me here today is, number one, our ancestors, and me representing the Boston Police Department as the first African-American police commissioner, and having lived experiences from being raised first in a farm in Hillsborough, Maryland, to coming to the big city, living in a tough community, tough area, where if anyone had asked me then if you'd ever be the first African-American police commissioner, it would have been an unobtainable goal with a brick ceiling. With that being said, thank God people were in my corner, and here I am now. But you cannot ever forget where you come from. And as is mentioned in the scope, there's positive interactions, and then there are horrible tragedies that we must address, because they seem to keep repeating themselves from the decades and centuries past to now. If nothing's changed, then you will scream Black Lives Matter. With that being said, it's important that as leaders in police departments that we have to be able to show how we differ from those tragedies in our police departments, and how we handle things, and how we've grown with our training, our diversity and inclusion, and what we're doing for police reform. And real quickly, Boston is now a population of over 700,000. Boston is now 50% people of color. And Boston now has a group of individuals in law enforcement, African-American District Attorney Rachel Rollins, African-American Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins, African-American Transit Chief Kenneth Green, and U.S. Marshal John Gibbons. So we as leaders in this community and members of Noble really, really applaud police reform. It's needed, but as well, to explain our cultural change from the warrior class to now community policing, where we work in partnership with everyone to help solve problems, including addressing police reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gross. Chief Hall?
Hi, I want to say first, good afternoon to everyone, and I am truly honored and blessed to share a panel with such distinguished guests. What brings me here today is reimagining policing. When we discuss reimagining policing, the opportunity to really define what that is, it means so many different things to so many different individuals. But we are in a time where we have the opportunity to change the trajectory of law enforcement. None of us on this panel are oblivious to how policing began and where its roots started. But there has been much work to change the direction and what has happened in the past. We have an opportunity to move forward. There's been a lot of work, but there's so much work to do. When we look at law enforcement agencies across this country, we've all been asked to do so much more than law enforcement is even trained to do. Any social ills that plague a city, if there's no resources, we provide that to the police department and say, handle it. Reimagining policing allows police agencies to get back to what we were designed to do, and that is to protect and serve our communities, to give resources from our city governments and from our cities, the resources to deal with the social needs of our community, recognizing that the outcomes that come when you call the police are not necessarily the outcomes that we need to deal with the social ills. Wherever there is poverty, there is crime. And if we don't deal with the issues of poverty, we're forcing our police department to enter into a zone that we were never designed to do. Being a police officer for 22 years is one thing. Being an African-American woman for my entire life gives me a platform, the understanding, the knowledge, and the wisdom to be able to lead in this time and to assist the communities that we serve in pushing our departments to the spaces that we need to be in equitably. So reimagining policing is something that I support. I support reimagining by not defunding the police department or dismantling a police department, but looking into our agencies and saying, how can we do this differently? Where can we peel off the layers and find the necessary monies that take the responsibility of homelessness, mental health, sleeping in the street, loud music, those things that put us in an adversarial relationship with individuals who are indigent, and take those responsibilities and put them where they need to be so that we can community engage, respond to calls for service, and build upon quality of life concerns that plague our community and do the best job that we can do in that. So reimagining policing is something that we're here to discuss, talk about what that looks like. And I'm looking forward to hearing exactly what the true definition for everyone is, because as I stated before, it means very different things to different individuals. But in order for us to get to the position that we need to be in as a country, we have to define what reimagining actually means and looks like as a whole, and it cannot be divided in its meaning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Hall. Vanita?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the Commissioner and the Chief and Attorney Crump for being here. It's a distinguished panel, certainly, to be a part of. I also want to thank Noble, because Noble's leadership in really being the conscience in law enforcement the last several years, especially in the absence of a Justice Department to support these efforts, I think has been so incredibly notable and laudable. And this conversation today, to me, is just another extension of that leadership. I am here today because I think that we are at a point of reckoning in our nation, and this moment feels different. George Floyd's murder happened against a backdrop of a global pandemic that has already revealed the degree of structural inequality and racism that plagues our healthcare outcomes. It's been devastating, in particular for Black and Brown communities, and also with an election that's looming and a hunger for change. Mr. Crump and I were last together at the House of Representatives testifying for the Justice and Policing Act next to Philonise Floyd, Mr. George Floyd's brother. And it was a really emotional day because it feels like there really is truly no return to normal. I began my career at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where I was a criminal defense lawyer and civil rights lawyer representing dozens of men and women who had been wrongfully incarcerated in bogus drug stings, racially biased drug stings, who had been over-sentenced as a result of the war on drugs. This was at a time when the nation's binge on criminal justice and criminal legal system infrastructure was only on the up and up. I went from there to the American Civil Liberties Union, where I launched the campaign to end mass incarceration, started working with conservatives and progressives alike to undo decades of systemic harms by laws that had just ratcheted up the number of people going in and the length of time people were staying in. And then, lo and behold, got a call by President Obama's administration and by Attorney General Eric Holder to come and head up the Civil Rights Division for the Department of Justice just weeks after Michael Brown had been killed in Ferguson. My 2.5 years as the head of the Civil Rights Division in President Obama's administration was really dominated by police reform. I went to any number of Noble meetings, met with law enforcement, but also met with countless mothers who had lost their loved ones and their sons to police violence. And we oversaw the investigation of the Ferguson, Baltimore, and Chicago police departments. It was a time when police violence, the movement for Black Lives, was calling a reckoning. But the reason why I'm here today and why I think this moment is different and why this conversation is so important is because we are at this perfect confluence of so many factors that are really calling for a new visioning for shrinking the footprint of the criminal legal system in Black communities, in communities of color, where for too long there's been systematic disinvestment healthcare, education, jobs, and an almost exclusive reliance on the criminal legal system as the answer. And this is something that we are now really contending with. And I think it's a real conversation that's incredibly important. I know that we're not going to end police violence and create police community trust just by police reform alone. And so asking these broader questions about our community's priorities, about the role of law enforcement, about the role that communities play in defining public safety, I think is crucially important. So thank you for hosting this conversation.
Thank you, Vanita. Attorney Crump?
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. And I first want to apologize to my noble family for being maybe a little underdressed, but I will explain. I am here currently in Richmond, Virginia with George Floyd's family, and we're marching with about 1,000 multi-generational, multicultural, and multi-geographical groups on Monument Square, where the Confederate monuments are being taken down ever so slowly, but progress is being made. And the George Floyd Foundation has partnered with change.org. And so the mayor of Richmond, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, and many other notable individuals will be celebrating tonight as we reimagine a hologram being put up of George Floyd, where Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, used to stand. And talking about reimagining, just reimagining something that brings many people together who believe in the Declaration of Independence versus the symbol of what Jefferson Davis stood for, the Confederacy, that really was an affront to the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths that all men are created equally. And so that's why I'm dressed the way I dress, as paying tribute to George. You see the I Can't Breathe t-shirt. And I'm here, Noble, and I'm so honored to be with Commissioner Gross, Chief Hall, and my dear colleague, Vanita, who I love partnering with on these very important causes for the advancement of not only our people, but of the culture. To talk about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Joel Escobedo, who many people don't know about, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 3 people of color that were killed by the people who were supposed to protect and serve them in some unbelievable ways. And in speaking on their behalf, my objective today is to speak truth to power, because I do realize how powerful the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives are, not only nationally, but in your individual cities. So I'm doing what my grandmother taught me to do today, and that is, when you get a chance to speak truth to power, you do it. Because I do believe we're at a tipping point in America. I mean, this is a moment. George Floyd's video on YouTube alone, not talking about all the other mediums that the video has been seen, it has been seen over 1 billion times worldwide. And that's why you have people marching not just all across America, but all across Europe, all across Africa, all across Australia, and Canada, and China. I mean, people are saying, until there's justice for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. And so this is our moment to seize upon it, as Benita and I testified before the U.S. Congress and House, and I pretty soon will be testifying before the United States Senate, that this is our time to finally get systematic reform in policing. to change the culture and the behavior of policing in America, especially as it relates to interactions with minority citizens. I don't want to talk around issues. I really want to learn and try to speak to these issues, because I do worry when the New York Times calls my office as the president of the National Civil Rights Trial Lawyers Association and asks the question, based on a study, we find that there's a great number of white supremacy in law enforcement agencies across America. Do you think that has an effect on what we're seeing happen in America? And so we have to deal with this. How do we address that, and how do we root that out? Since these news journalists were able to look at their personal Facebook pages and social media pages and find these associations of white supremacy. And finally, I am here to really try to seize this moment, to transform this moment into a movement, to transform the pain of these families into power, and finally, to transform the protests into policy that will help us make a better world for all our children, so that in certain communities, it won't be they get protected and served. In other communities, we get policed and brutalized. And so that's what we're here to talk about. And I'm so grateful to have this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Crump. I think all of you hit on a common theme, right? In terms of what does reimagining look like? What does change look like for the culture of policing? So we'll just jump right into it. I think what we all know is that, may not be within your departments, may not be anything that you particularly experience, but the level of racism that permeates within the culture of policing. And so when you have communities asking the question, of what they want to have changed, and also what they want the investments to go to, which all of you touched upon in terms of social services, addressing homelessness, addressing mental health, etc. What does that look like for you in your iteration or vision for reimagining policing? And I don't want to just stay on the surface. I want to dive deeper and talk about what would changing the culture of policing, since all of you touched upon it, look like, right? Whether that's accountability, whether there's some specific policy changes. I'd ask each of you to offer some brief commentary around what that change looks like for you with respect to the culture, and also articulate what you mean when you say reimagining policing. And so we'll start with Commissioner Gross.
Thank you. Great question. We really have to show, especially in 21st century policing, what it means to be a community that is served by community policing. So the onus isn't solely on the police department. We have to work in partnership to solve problems. But with that being said, Boston used to be known as one of the most racist cities, was one of the most racist police departments. When you're talking about engaging the community, you have to show that you are different from the past. And when I'm talking about showing, you can talk all day. You're going to have to get out there and talk to the community, share lived experiences, and show how your department differs from the past. So in Boston, we're strongly focused on a standalone policy and bias-free policing. The way you train your recruit officers and your in-service training as well is fair and impartial policing to address unconscious and implicit biases. Procedural justice. Your community wants to be treated with empathy, sympathy, care, and respect, and not disrespect. And as well, de-escalation. And through all the aforementioned, we bring in the community to share lived experiences and bring in the community to share how they would like to be treated. Our learned attorney just stated that in certain communities, it's like, hey, you're served and protected. So you have to show that your department serves all communities equally. and that you understand the history of communities too, the struggle, the strife, socioeconomic issues, healthcare issues, and the disparity betwixt communities. So with that being said, and reimagining policing, you can't think about the old days of just responding to the calls. You have to delve in deeper and wear many, many different hats in service to your community. With that being said, oftentimes we find that we wear too many hats though. So for defunding the police, I don't mind as long as the monies that are taken from the police budget are going to programs and initiatives that will help us serve the community. Because right now in Boston, we're serving a population that's dependent on opioids, dependent on alcohol and other narcotics, mental health issues, homeless issues. And we're wearing those hats of being social service agents, counselors, mothers, fathers. So if you're going to defund the police, you have to make sure that all of this money that's being taken from your police budget goes into programs and initiatives that will help alleviate some of the duties and responsibilities that we have. I don't think we should be responding to a home if a child doesn't want to go to school or if a child's acting unruly on a bus. So when I'm saying community policing, this is the entire village that has to be working with us so that we can best serve our communities. And lastly, you definitely have to show that you have the ability to police your own. You have to be transparent about your internal affairs and anti-corruption process and what you're doing. You have to have cold, hard discussions about civilian review boards. We've just implemented a body-worn camera program that builds trust in the community. It also protects the community as well as officers. But you're gonna have to have cold, hard discussions because these negative interactions keep occurring. And I believe that every city is just one incident away, unless they are addressing the issues. And the murder of Mr. Floyd has definitely bring some awareness to the neighborhoods and this nation about disparate treatment between neighborhoods of color and other neighborhoods. So I believe that we should take those 8 minutes and 46 seconds and you should split it. 8 minutes and 46 seconds where we saw a man being murdered by the people that are supposed to serve and protect, that turned into a murderers in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and split the time. Take half of that time and start cold-hearted discussions with your community, exchange, productive dialogue, and move forward. And that's how you reimagine policing in Boston. That's with the entire village at hand, helping to make the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gross. Over to you, Vanita.
Sure. So I think reimagining policing involves a lot of different things. About a year and a half ago, the Leadership Conference launched an initiative called the New Era of Public Safety. And we did this, we put together a massive guide of best practices, some of the most cutting edge practices of 21st century policing. It was taking the guide that President Obama had done through the Task Force on 21st Century Policing and kind of went a layer deeper, working with noble members like Ron Davis and others to help inform civil rights organizations that helped inform a whole range of some of the best practices coming out of the Justice Department's consent decrees by civil rights organizations, looking at things like discriminatory policing, de-escalation, use of force, the duty to intervene, the duty to provide medical aid, accountability systems, training. And we did that really because policing, obviously, in America is fundamentally local with 18,000 police departments and a federal government that right now, unfortunately, has really abdicated its role in promoting police reform and community police trust. It was really important to be able to provide a resource for communities to do this work. And I would say that you've got to focus in the area of police reform. These issues, there's no silver bullet. After Ferguson, it felt like a lot of jurisdictions were reaching to body-worn cameras as the answer. But we all knew that policing involves many, many more kind of issues that need to be worked on, and that you can have the best policies in the world. But as I say, culture eats policy for lunch, and it needs to be accompanied by training. It needs to be accompanied by accountability on the back end. And after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis on June 1st, the Leadership Conference led an effort with Congress and signed by over 450 national civil and human rights organizations with 8 major points that needed to be included in any federal bill. Things like creating finally a national use of force standard, which doesn't exist. A lot of people kind of are surprised to hear that, but it doesn't exist. Ending the militarization of policing, which has been really a scourge in too many local police departments. Strengthening the Justice Department's ability to prosecute police misconduct. Creating a national police misconduct registry so that officers with long histories, disciplinary records like Derek Chauvin, couldn't just cycle from department to department and escape kind of detection and have and then basically have these problems reemerge in every police department. There are other parts of this framework that were then adopted in the Justice and Policing Act. And these are things that need to become law. I think policy is really important, but they, as I said, there have to be accompanied by systematic training and culture change and leadership, of course, the kind of leadership that so many in Noble seek to provide in the communities that they're in. Really, that community policing isn't just a program off to the side, but is actually a philosophy around a guardian mentality in policing. But I actually happen to believe, as do I think many others, that police reform alone is not going to be enough in this moment. And that we are also looking at the kinds of priorities that have been set in this country, not by police chiefs, but actually by mayors, by politicians who have landed so many social ills at the feet of police. And in some communities, there's only one response. There's a 911 line that requires a police officer to come in, and no other services to deal with a list of social problems. And in other communities where the police are only called for very serious offenses and the interactions are very, very different. And this whole thing around how do you actually think about what role the mental health system, what would a well-funded, well-resourced mental health system look like? What would it look like to be able to have calls diverted to mental health professionals where it's safe to do so that things don't escalate when a family member is in crisis? What does it look like to have social services that actually provide for people experiencing homelessness or school discipline? For so long in this country, we've really treated so many of these issues in certain communities as criminal justice problems. And that's where I think when you hear people talk about defund, they can mean a lot of different things. For a lot of people, it's really a question of investment and changing priorities and having a more community-centered approach, community-based, informed policymaking that moves away from this over-reliance on arrests and incarceration in some communities to a more inclusive and holistic one. And I think this is where reimagining public safety, that's what, to me, it's fundamentally about. And it involves many more decision makers outside of police departments and police chiefs. And I think that conversation we haven't had in a really serious way until now. And the reckoning, I would say, on racism and systemic racism and how it kind of has infected not only policing as an institution, but frankly, every American institution, given the history of this country. That's the kind of reckoning that is so crucial right now, and I believe is going to be part of the transformation that we need to see.
Thank you, Vanita. Attorney Crump?
Yes, and forgive me, I know I'm going to talk about the Attorney General's bar response to protesters, and so I'm honestly trying to look at this exchange he had with one of the Black Caucus members. But I have been well versed on this question because I've been asked so many times, Chris, doing interviews about this whole notion of what do we need to do to impact policing in America. And I'm like most of the people on this call, I don't believe there need to be an effort to defund the police. I think we should make sure we work together as partners, community partners and law enforcement partners, to come up with better solutions. I think that I would be naive to believe that just us talking about it and making agreements are going to provide the systematic reform that we need. As Benita has articulated, we need to have national policies in place within our institutions of justice, because we are very aware that people come and go. A lot of the police chiefs are here one day and they're gone the next. So we can't make it about individuals. We have to make it about systems and institutions and policies and laws. And when you look at that, I jotted down the national use of force, because there has to be work done with our community partners, that being the police and the civil rights community and our elected officials. But the courts also have to play a role in this. I know that Garner versus Tennessee and Graham v. Conner, where the Supreme Court counter has given what the law is going to be on police use of force. And I'm not sure if we come up with our national use unless it is signed by the president. The Supreme Court's policy is going to dictate every time there's what we believe an unjustifiable or unnecessary use of force, that they're going to say, well, we can't Monday morning quarterback the police, even though we have video, even though we know that if there was not so much attention paid to George Floyd or any of these other cases, qualified immunity normally absolves police of any liability. And we've seen that over and over again, where we all want to say Black Lives Matter, but yet when we get in the courtroom and they apply qualified immunity, it's as if Black lives don't matter at all. And so we have to be honest with ourselves. But I do believe videos are so important, because I do think it's about transparency. And then you have to add accountability once we all see what happened. And then that's how you get to trust. Because I think the problem is that we just have a great mistrust of one another, that being law enforcement and minority communities. And I think Noble plays a vital role in bridging that divide of mistrust. I always acknowledge Noble for having a unique voice, a powerful voice, but very unique voice. I'll never forget, it was during the Trayvon Martin case to Commissioner Gross and Chief Hall, that the first people to join the young people saying that the killer of Trayvon Benjamin Martin should be arrested and have to come to court to face the evidence and the witnesses against him was Noble. And I remember that op-ed ran in the USA Today. And it was the first time that you had credibility for law enforcement saying and doing what we all knew was true, that if an unarmed white kid had been killed, we know they would have arrested the person, at least arrested them. But when as Black people, we have to do such extraordinary things to get simple justice. And so when I think about that, I think about transparency being so vital, because we should have, to answer your question directly, Chris, a federal obstruction of justice law. And it should be very clear. With all this technology, with Congress and everybody allocating money to all these municipalities to get these body cameras on, I just simply reject this notion about when Black people are alleged to commit crime, we can show videos everywhere of them. I mean, all over, Chris, everywhere. But then when the police is alleged of doing something bad, oh no, it's an ongoing investigation. We can't see it for 2 or 3 years like Laquan McDonough and all these other cases. That does not bridge this divide of trust, because we see there are two justice systems that exist in America, one for how you treat Black America and one for how you treat white America. And if a white police officer kills a Black or brown person, we change the rules. We can't have that. This obstruction of justice law should be that if we got these body cameras and you have an interaction with a citizen and that citizen is injured, brutalized, or worse, killed, that if you did not have that camera on, there should be a presumption that you violated this federal obstruction of justice law. And now we're not saying take away police officers' due process of the law, even though I doubt very seriously that will ever happen in America. I'm just being real. But we're not advocating taking away the due process of police. But there should be a rebuttable presumption that if that video tape was not on, that you did something inappropriate, or you did something unethical, or you did something illegal. It's only a rebuttable presumption that you can then offer a reason why your body camera wasn't on. But initially, if it's not on, because we want them to take this so very seriously about transparency. And if we don't do that, then we're going to continue to have these problems. Only other thing I would say, Chris, is we need to abolish the chokehold and we need to abolish no-knock warrants, because no-knock warrants, based on what I work in Brown and Taylor, we have found even though Black people make up 13% of the population in America, in states all across America, they are executed against Black people 50%, over 50% of the time.
Thank you, Attorney Crump. Chief Hall?
So thank you so much. There has been so much stated around reimagining policing, and I just want to thank everybody for their input on what that actually looks like. I think when you go around the table, everyone is saying pretty much the same thing, that we need to be different. We need to be different within our agencies, and it starts with us internally. Everything is laid at police's feet, and the onus is not solely on the head of a police chief, but it does start with police chiefs in their respective agencies understanding that the premise, the basis for which law enforcement was created with systemic racism. So culturally within our organizations, we have to dive deep. We have to do cultural assessments. We have to find out who is in our organization by getting the necessary assessments, finding out how to mitigate through that process, because the truth of the matter is we all have biases. And how are we going to do this job with excellence, with intentionality, in taking care of our community? We talk about community policing, but if we come to the table with biases that are undealt with, community policing becomes difficult. I think it's a huge part of training. It's a huge part of making sure that the training that is in our organization is communicated, seen, participated by the members of our community, all communities, but specifically our Black and Brown communities who are impacted the most. You know, we touched on de-escalation and all of those things, but de-escalation is just one component to teach. We have to make sure in our organizations that we are not just giving officers an opportunity to de-escalate, but sometimes teaching them to disengage, giving them alternative solutions. We currently, in all of our agencies, teach officers what you should do when you're faced with a situation. How about we start teaching what you could do, these alternative solutions to use of force at any level? And so those are the kinds of things when I look at reimagining policing, is how are we training and how is that communicated to our community? And is our community a part of what we're training our officers? Because there are so many pieces to reimagining policing. It doesn't start in policing. One of the things that's huge for me is equitable and fair. Police can't be the beginning of equitable, fair, and just policing because we're driven by data. Unless we deal with the socioeconomics, the disparity in education, training, and opportunities in communities, the police, when we come in, we are now going to the problem, where the crime is, where the robberies, the rapes, the murders. And so we are given a disadvantage at the beginning of getting the ball because now we're in communities who are already underserved and don't have the necessary resources. And our resources are there because in order for us to impact the entire city as a whole and deal with the crime issues, we are on top of individuals who are already oppressed. So this is a huge undertaking, and it doesn't just start with the police. But what I truly believe is in policing, we have to be intentional about ensuring that the members who join our police department are prepared mentally, physically, and emotionally. And we've dealt with any bias that exists within them to deal with our community, and that our community can see that process. Transparency is huge. Technology is not just body cameras. Technology is releasing video. In the city of Dallas, we've made multiple adjustments. We've made policy changes, general order changes, because we're listening and hearing what our community wants from us. But until we deal internally with our culture and some of the things that divide us, it's difficult to really hone in and be true community policing partners with our community. So it's a plethora of different things in reimagining. I can tell you that the city of Dallas is committed to all of that change, to being a great partner, to policing ourselves, to looking internally to see where we're broken, what needs to be fixed, bringing our community business partners in alongside of us so that they can be a part of that change. And so that we can eliminate the opportunity to over police our Black and brown communities. But we need the help of not just law enforcement, but our entire political body, our city elected officials, and our community.
Thank you, Chief Hall. So all of you all touched on a couple of important things, and I just want to ask this question because just being candid in all that I heard, it gets to the heart and essence of the very question I'm about to ask, and I think Attorney Crump really raised it, right? What happens when the policies don't go far enough? When training, de-escalation, disengagement, failure to duty around duty to intervene, deliberate indifference, all of the mechanisms that are put in place to change the culture of policing, divestments, investments, training, body cams, etc., don't work. Where do you all stand and see the role of qualified immunity and removing the impunity in which officers operate under, which is in some ways allow the trajectory of police violence, brutality, and police killings to sort of take off because there is no accountability? And so I'm really curious to know if you can just articulate it in 30 seconds to a minute so we can move to some Q&A, or if we have more time to just delve in and really answer the question around qualified immunity and accountability and what that looks like if everything else continues to fail, because we've seen thus far that those instances of policy reforms, training, etc., just have not gone far enough to change the trajectory in terms of what we're seeing with how police engage with Black communities and Black individuals. So I'll start off with Commissioner Gross and we'll go around the room. You can take a minute to a minute 30 seconds to respond to that.
Okay, thank you. Qualified immunity. Again, it comes down to accountability and building trust with that community that you have the ability to police your own. So you should do everything in your power to create policies and initiatives with the input from the community. And quite frankly, show your disciplinary processes with internal affairs, anti-corruption, show your relationship with your district attorney. I know here in Boston, I have a great relationship with the district attorney. And in fact, through Attorney Crump's, what he alluded to earlier, when we have officer-involved shootings and we have video footage, we work in partnership with the district attorney who's in charge of those investigations, and we actually convene a group from the community and we show that video footage. We don't want to jeopardize the integrity of the investigation, But like you said, if you wait 2 or 3 years to see a video that could explain exactly what happened, then you're already at a loss. And you do, again, have to be transparent, show that you have to have the ability to police your own, or you're never going to have trust with the community. And they're never going to believe that in any investigation are they going to have fair and equitable justice when it comes to officer-involved shootings, incidents of excessive force, and bias, and being biased against the community. So it's a very important discussion. I don't think it should be decided by, again, police chiefs alone, but should be a broader discussion with the input of the community. Right now, here in Boston, we have bills being written by not only the Senate, but as well as the House. Qualified immunity comes into play. And it's a huge discussion here about what that means in 21st century and what that means in regards to how we are able to police our own. So tough discussion. And I'm glad I'm on this panel discussion. I was hoping this question would come up so I could glean from the advice and experience and wisdom from our other panelists.
Thank you, Commissioner Gross. Chief Hall?
So with respect to qualified immunity, I mean, this topic will be debated over and over again. What I feel, what personally and professionally is, we have a duty and a responsibility to hold those individuals accountable within our agencies. And individuals who have total disrespect for proper procedure and who violate the law should not be qualified to receive qualified immunity. Those individuals who are working within the confines of the department and they make a mistake because we are human and we err, then I do believe that qualified immunity should exist. But individuals who have blatant disrespect for proper procedure and violate the law, there's no room for qualified immunity.
Thank you, Chief Hall. Benita?
Well, the Leadership Conference, the organization that I am the head of, has been supporting ending qualified immunity. There's no question that you can, as I said, put up all of the kind of policy changes and training, but without real accountability, you don't actually achieve your goals. And when you think about that video for 8 minutes and 48 seconds that Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck, he was looking straight in the cameras, and the look of impunity, as though he knew that that he would never get held to account, as has been the case in many instances, even caught on videotape. It kind of sears in one's mind. There's a reason why it went viral. The kind of shock of it, I think, really undergirded the fact that there is a sense in a lot of communities that when misconduct happens, that nobody is held to account. And so to me, though, it's about ending qualified immunity, which has been a shield in the civil system for victims and families of state violence to be able to obtain some sense of justice. There's also criminal accountability, which has been very limited. It's one of the reasons that the Leadership Conference and many others has been pushing for expanded Justice Department charging options for police misconduct. That is also a form of accountability. Even while I think it's so crucially important to work on systemic reform and to prevent these roadblocks from happening, Chris, as you said, in the instances where it fails, there has to be some level of accountability in order for the institution of policing to actually have legitimacy within communities. If people feel like there's just two different systems of justice and two different sets of standards, it really undermines public safety for everyone. And so I think this whole issue around accountability is one that is absolutely crucial in this moment, and requires looking at a whole range of different options that, frankly, I think have been quite elusive up until now.
Thank you, Benita. Attorney Crump, if you could take a minute or so to respond to the question, and I will ask one last question to see if we have any questions from the audience.
I think I could take less time than that, Chris. I think qualified immunity has such a chilling effect on equal justice in America that it should be abolished just for that alone, especially when you think about Breonna Taylor just the fact that there were several violations and so forth, and to think that because of the Supreme Court holding in Graham v. Conn and Gardner v. Tennessee, it not only affects the civil, but it has a chilling effect on criminal as well, because quite frankly, they apply those standards and say, well, hey, you can't Monday morning quarterback the police decision. You weren't there in his shoes. Well, we got technology that can put us pretty close, and with the training, they shouldn't have killed that innocent Black woman. So I'll leave it there. I'm on record about qualified immunity. I wrote a book about it.
Thank you, Attorney Crump. And for the chiefs, just real quickly, how do you engage the community in creating policing for 21st century? So Commissioner Gross and Chief Hall, if you could take a couple of seconds, take 30 seconds or so to answer that question.
Okay, who's first, me?
Yep, you can go ahead, Chief Gross, and then we'll turn it over to Chief Hall.
Thank you. We have a very strong and robust community policing model. It was recognized by President Obama in 21st century policing. And basically what we do here is we do have those cold, hard discussions with the community about their needs and concerns, and especially how and what a police department looks like, and what types of policies and initiatives that we have in place to best serve the community. So we do have discussions and input and questions, not only from our city councilors, our senators, our House of Representatives, the ACLU, and our community stakeholders, including the clergy, who we know is very important to our communities. And you bring them into the conversation. You never deny anything that has happened in the past that's negative. You own it. You own it, use those as teachable learning moments, and then you do a compare and contrast, how things were in the past and what we need to do in the present and what we need to do in the future to make sure that we have the best policies and initiatives going forward. It's one thing to have a mission and mission statement, but you also have to have a vision and a vision statement. And that can only be done with the input from the community. So you can never use the moniker community policing if you're not utilizing the community to help you create policy, to help you focus on your programs and initiatives. And as I have forestated, it does take the entire village. So we have some of the best institutions of higher learning here. They also help us look at things through a different lens. So again, you're going to use that moniker community policing. The community needs to be a part of your creation of your policies and initiatives, and be educated about what you're doing and what you can do together.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief Hall?
So I'll just echo the commissioner. One of the things that we are huge proponents of here in the city of Dallas, and that is bringing our community on board. I have advisory boards, stakeholder boards, and they tour the police department. They tour our 911 center, our real-time crime center, our simulating training, our training academy. They have been instrumental in assisting us with changing use of force policies and any other general orders that they see fit in adding to what we're doing here in the city of Dallas. We believe in our community, and we believe that the only way community partnerships exist is not only that you hear from them, but you listen, you respond, and you continue to work together. And that's what the premise of 21st century policing is, that we can only have trust in what we believe in. And we can only believe in that which we can see, which is tangible. And so making our agencies a part of our community, being open to when the community in the city of Dallas said they wanted an oversight board, we now have an oversight board, because our police department says if that's what you need to build trust, then that's what we'll have. So it's that kind of relationship, it's that kind of understanding, it's that kind of partnership that says we're in this and we're in this together. This is a marriage that neither one of us have the option to divorce. So we have to do everything that we possibly can to work through the challenges. And we know that there are many. The Dallas Police Department, this police chief is committed to that process. I want to thank Noble, who has been a mentor of mine for more than 12, 13 years, and continuing the fight for justice through action. And so I am just honored to sit here as a member and as a chief, utilizing the skills that has been given to me over the years. And thank each and every one of you for this panel today. You are magnificent.
Thank you, Chief Hall. And before we close out, I just want to ask a final question, which came from our audience, that really, asked the question with respect to the business community. So it's, what can corporate America do to be helpful with policing reform and criminal justice reform? They're here and they're ready to help. And so we talked about activists, we talked about advocates, policing, the culture, et cetera. But then corporate America, what can they do to be helpful in this moment? So we'll start off with Attorney Crump and then work our way backward. And so just 30 seconds to a minute, because we're over time, and I want to be respectful and mindful of everybody's time and the other panels that are happening.
Certainly. Since George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery Breonna Taylor, I've been giving speeches to corporate America. I had the pleasure of speaking to Truist Bank and Starbucks and all these corporations who are saying, what can we do? And I have to give a plug to the CEO of Truist Bank, because I think this is what everybody should kind of do in this moment. He said that when the George Floyd protests were going on and there were cities catching fire, he said one of his friends came, one of his executives, another wealthy white man, and he knocked on the door. He said, Kelly, it's getting bad out there. We got to do something. We got to call somebody. And he said he thought about it for a second. He said, well, I don't know somebody's phone number. I don't know that somebody's address. And I don't know that somebody's name. And he said he concluded as he looked at his friend, we just somebody that got to do something. We have resources. We are a major banking institution. Why can't we be part of the solution? And so that's what we have to first get our corporate partners to thinking, that it's not just about them, it's about all of us. And we have to all provide solutions. We just can't depend on nobody to give the solutions, or the National Civil Rights trial lawyers to give the solution. We all have a part in this, as Dr. King said, in this struggle for equality and justice.
Thank you, Attorney Crump. Benita?
Yeah, I just want to co-sign what Attorney Crump, my friend, said just now. I think that all businesses are part of community. It's not something that is happening outside. We all have to see ourselves as part of the solution. And I think there's a lot of different ways. I think it's wonderful that there's been corporate sponsorship of this conversation. Companies can support organizations that are at the front lines of this work, like Noble, like the Leadership Conference, like organizations that are working to promote police reform, community police trust, that are doing good work on these issues day in and day out. I think what you do and how you show up in communities where you have a lot of employees really matters. I think there's a lot of ways I've seen pretty amazingly so many companies stand up in this moment supporting and advocating for criminal justice reform, for racial equity, for police reform. There have been companies that have been speaking out in favor of the Justice in Policing Act, telling Congress to keep at it, to produce these solutions. And I think all of this really matters. I also think, though, that we need to make sure that companies also promote their civic engagement of their own employees in participating in the census, which is responsible for how policy decisions and funding gets made at the local level. That's happening right now at 2020census.gov, encouraging people to register to vote, which is another form of change. So I think there's a lot of different ways for companies to engage, but we all need to see ourselves as part of the solution and not just kind of bearing witness from the outside.
Thank you, Vanita. Chief Hall?
So I just want to say thank you to the corporate sponsors who are here. And thank you for wanting to help. We are doing multiple things within our communities. Internally, we are having cultural assessments, training on implicit bias and multiculturalism, and a multitude of training that we are going through and ensuring that our officers have. And that's where some of your corporations have done well in those spaces where you've trained all across the country. And so we could use your help in those areas, as well as uniting our community with those training opportunities to bring us all together. So there's a multitude of work that needs to be done in and outside of our agencies. And we believe that you have the resources as well as the platforms to assist us in that process. And we welcome you here in the city of Dallas. We are actually working with a number. Ernst & Young is one of the groups that is working with us as we start to train our entire department from top to bottom in multiple areas to better serve our communities. And they're bringing our community partners in to identify what they would want to see in that training. We're working with NEC. So we welcome any of the sponsors that are here today to continuously assist us as we commit to being the best police department and police departments across this country. You can help us in that process.
Thank you, Commissioner Gross.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're very, very blessed here in Boston. Our private sector fully supports the Boston Police Department, and I'd be remiss if I did not include our professional sports teams as well. Not only do they help fund programs for our children and youth through our Police Activities League, and it's not just sports either. We're talking about academic scholarships, performing arts. We're also connected with Harvard University, the Harvard Club. But as well, we have several philanthropists here in the business sector that are just so generous with their contributions to the community, not only with providing money, but as well as opportunities, internships, the ability to come in and intern, also giving jobs, not only to young men and women, but looking at opportunities to fund things for seniors to do as well. So it's a very important aspect of community policing. Number one, it helps bridge the gaps between those private sector entities and the community, especially your major shopping establishments such as Macy's, Lord & Taylor's. Often we know our communities, we go and shop in these areas, but we hardly hear of anyone giving anything back. But here in Boston, from the small businesses to medium to large, all give back to the programs and initiatives. Their generosity is just so greatly appreciated. And that's what we need. It is a village concept. I don't think you can say that enough. And it just shows that when you've attained your goal as a business person, and you're successful, then it's great that you're showing that you still care about where you came from and you still care about the community, and that you're going to do everything in your power to making sure that you create a better quality of life for all by your generous contributions. And Mr. Kraft from the New England Patriots just gave me $200,000 where we focus on individuals who have the greatest challenges and introduce them to union trade apprenticeships. It's called Operation Exit through Mayor Walsh and many of our city services. And again, many businesses in Boston, AAA rating, they contribute and they do make a difference. And of course, in that partnership, you should brag about them. Just like the sponsors here today, I'd like to thank you. This is an excellent panel, an excellent discussion. I appreciate you all. I've learned many things in the short time we've been together. So again, thank you. That partnership with our businesses is a part of this village concept. They have to do their part too, and they're doing it here. They're doing that here in Boston.
Thank you, Commissioner Gross. So that's going to conclude the panel. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists, Commissioner Gross, Chief Hall, Attorney Crump. for engaging, being candid, and having a thoughtful conversation. This shouldn't be the last conversation that we have, and hopefully we can continue these conversations offline. I also want to thank Noble for having us all to participate in such a diverse and rich conversation around reimagining policing in the 21st century. And I also want to thank the sponsors for allowing this to happen as well. So thank you, Verizon, and thank you, Truist. That will conclude today's panel discussion. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent job, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed week.
You all too. Thank you.
What a blessing to be here today with you guys.
I know, right?
This is bragging rights right here.